All right, so today we're jumping into a serious time capsule. We're heading back to September 2002, specifically the NYC604 email list archives.
Oh, wow.
For those who might not be familiar, this is a public online group all dedicated to the New York City trance scene. Think of it like event reviews, music debates, all the drama you'd expect from a really thriving subculture, but all before social media as we know it today.
Exactly. It's like a gold mine for understanding that era. And, you've shared some particularly interesting threads with me.
Oh yeah, we're definitely getting into some good stuff today, trust me. And to help us sort through all of this, we've got an expert in electronic music subcultures, particularly their evolution online. So maybe you can kind of paint the picture for us. What was the general vibe of this NYC 604 in September 2002?
Well, there were a few key events that were really dominating the chatter. There was Infected Mushroom at Shelter, the Gay in Mind Festival, and an upcoming Omni-Tribe party. But woven through all of that was this kind of tension, like an undercurrent, a struggle to define what the ideal trance experience should be.
Ooh, that's interesting, like this pursuit of the perfect party. And speaking of parties, the Shelter event with Infected Mushroom. I was reading about some pretty intense heat there.
Yeah, this wasn't just your average sweaty club night, haha. Multiple people were mentioning it being so hot, some even said they escaped to the roof of Shelter.
Wow, dedicated fans.
But that also highlights something interesting, right? Like, venues back then, especially in these underground scenes, weren't always the most comfortable, I guess.
Precisely. It's like you can see echoes of those DIY spaces where prioritizing the music was really key and often came before, like, perfectly controlled environments.
It makes sense. So, heatwave aside, what was the overall reception to that Infected Mushroom set?
It was kind of mixed, actually. Some people loved it, calling it a powerful journey, but others felt like it wasn't really peak Infected Mushroom. And this actually ties into another big discussion happening that month, the whole ravers versus trancers debate.
Yes, that came up a lot in those emails, didn't it?
Oof.
But for those who weren't part of that scene, what was this distinction all about? It's a bit complex, but essentially certain members, most vocally a guy named Jason Sanachan, felt there was a difference between people who were truly dedicated to the music and those who were just there for the rave atmosphere, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I'm seeing Jason's name pop up everywhere in these emails. He seems like quite a character.
He is very opinionated, very passionate about what he considered the true trance spirit, which he felt was being diluted.
So Jason's the self-appointed guardian of trance authenticity. Interesting.
Yeah.
But going back to this raver-trancer divide, how did it play out in reactions to events like Gay in Mind versus, say, Phantasm?
Perfect example. Gen Mind, which was an outdoor festival, was overwhelmingly praised. Even the landowner, described as a monk, was thanking attendees. Phantasm, on the other hand, had some logistical issues and didn't quite hit the mark for a lot of the NYC 604 members. And you can really see this reflected in Jason's comments. He's constantly searching for that smaller, more community-driven vibe that Gay in Mind seemed to capture.
So it wasn't just about the music itself, but the environment, the crowd, the sense of shared purpose, almost like seeking a temporary utopia, as cheesy as that sounds.
Absolutely. And this longing for the ideal party is a thread we'll see a lot throughout these emails.
Now, amidst all this talk of ideal parties and trans purity, there's also the tweak incident.
Yes, the tweak incident. We can't avoid that one. This is where the community really gets thrown into turmoil.
Yeah, for those just joining us, give us the rundown.
Okay, so basically a former NYC 604 member, they called him Tweak, appeared on this VH1 special about club drugs. And he wasn't just on the show, he was filmed doing ketamine, and get this, in front of a synthetic sadhu's banner.
Whoa, that's, yeah, not great PR for the scene, especially when you're talking about illegal substances.
Exactly. And the fallout is fascinating. Some want to just completely ostracize Tweak. Others are preaching forgiveness. But Jason, he goes on this huge tirade, calling Tweak a retard and blaming him for potentially bringing down the entire scene.
That's harsh, even for the early 2000s internet, which wasn't exactly known for politeness.
It is, and it really speaks to that underlying fear of mainstream attention, of the scene being misrepresented, especially during that time when, drug crackdowns were a real concern.
So Tweak almost becomes a symbol of this conflict between underground culture and the watchful eye of the outside world. It feels like this could be a whole deep dive on its own, just the anxieties and reactions it triggered.
It really could. But it's also important to remember that not everyone shared Jason's extreme stance. There was definitely nuance to the community's response.
Right, it wasn't just one hive mind. Multiple opinions were flying around. And speaking of multiple opinions, did anyone else besides Jason have any strong opinions on this whole raver versus trancer debate?
Oh, absolutely. But to really understand those, we need to dive into another fascinating aspect of NYC 604.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. Looks like we'll have to continue this conversation after a quick break.
I'm ready when you are. There's so much more to uncover in these emails. So we were talking about how that whole tweak incident really exposed the anxieties about the scene's image and where it was headed. But, beyond just Jason's really strong reactions to it all, there's another layer here to explore. And it kind of ties back into that whole raver versus trancer debate.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Okay, so imagine this. It's the early 2000s, right? Internet forums, they're still relatively new. And for these niche communities like the NYC trance scene, these online spaces become super vital, for sharing information, for connecting with like-minded people, all of that.
All right, like it's their version of social media before Facebook and Instagram and all that took over.
Exactly. And, within NYC604, you see this constant back and forth about event reviews, opinions on different DJs, even debates on what even constitutes proper trance etiquette.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that.
Yeah.
Especially Jason. He had some pretty strong opinions about how people should act at parties.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He'd go on these rants against things like glow sticks, excessive drug use, basically anything he saw as detracting from the music itself. He even calls people out for talking too much during sets. He'd say stuff like, if you want to converse so badly, go to a cafe.
Wow. No holding back at all. But was everyone on board with Jason's super strict vision?
That's the thing. There was pushback, too. Some people argued that his whole definition of a true trancer was elitist, that it was excluding people who might be new to the scene or just have different ways of expressing their enjoyment.
It's that classic tension, right? Gatekeeping versus being welcoming to newcomers, trying to preserve a certain vibe,
Yeah.
but also allowing the scene to grow and change.
Exactly. And you see this playing out not just in these abstract debates, but in how people reacted to specific parties.
Okay, so what? Give me an example.
Well, remember how we talked about that Omnitribe party that was coming up that month? The one with DJs Antix and Sanjeet. Anti-Mix being that well-known UK psytrance artist.
Oh, yeah, right. I was curious to hear more about that one.
So, leading up to the event, there's a ton of excitement. People are sharing links to Anti's music, talking about how pumped they are to see him spin. But then you start to see some comments, even Jason chimes in here, worrying that it might turn into too much of a rave, attract the wrong crowd.
There's that fear again, right? The fear of the scene losing its underground, pure feel.
Exactly. And it's so fascinating because this is all happening before the party even happens. It's this preemptive anxiety about what the experience might be like.
It shows how much these parties were more than just a night out. It was about identity, belonging, a shared set of values, at least for some.
Yeah, and for someone like Jason, who is so invested in those values, any perceived threat to them became a huge deal.
So did the Omtroy party actually live up to the hype? Or did it descend into the rave chaos that Jason was so afraid of?
Well, that's the thing. We don't actually get a clear answer in the emails, at least not in ones you shared with me.
Oh, a true cliffhanger. I guess that's part of the fun of these archives, right? We get these snapshots of a moment in time.
Yeah.
But the full picture is still kind of mysterious.
Totally. It leaves us wondering, did the people who were apprehensive still go and enjoy themselves? Did the party become a big point of contention afterwards? We can only speculate.
Yeah, I kind of love that. It sparks the imagination. But before we get too lost in hypotheticals, there's another side of NYC 604 I wanted to touch on.
What's that?
It's aside from all these intense debates and event reviews, you also see these little glimpses into people's lives outside of the whole club scene.
Oh, yeah, totally. Those little nuggets of everyday life are the best.
Yeah. I found this thread where someone's asking for recommendations for a good bagel spot in the city.
Classic. The essentials, even trance heads gotta eat.
Exactly. And it made me wonder, did any of these online interactions ever spill over into real life? Did people meet up, become friends? Was there a sense of community beyond the computer screen?
It's a great question. Hard to say for sure just from the emails, but I wouldn't be surprised. This is before social media as we know it, so for people who are really into a specific subculture, these online forums were basically their main way of connecting with each other.
Right, which makes their passionate debates and anxieties even more understandable. Right, this wasn't just some abstract online space for them. It was their connection to a community they really cared about.
Totally. It adds another dimension to Jason's fervor, doesn't it? He's not just arguing about music, he's trying to protect something that's obviously super important to him.
This is reminding me of something you mentioned earlier about how these online communities were also really important for sharing music.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Before Spotify and instant downloads and all that, getting your hands on a new track or a recording of a live set was a whole thing.
Yeah, I remember burning CDs and swapping mixtapes. It was a whole process.
And in NYC604, you constantly see people asking for recordings, offering to trade, discussing the best ways to, like, capture audio from parties.
It really shows their dedication, right? This wasn't just passive listening. They were actively involved in documenting and sharing the music they loved.
It makes you wonder, did they have any idea that these casual exchanges would one day be like historical artifacts, that we'd be sitting here poring over them, trying to piece their world together?
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it like that. But speaking of piecing things together, there's one person from these emails we haven't talked about yet, and I'm really curious to get your take on him.
Oh, you mean Kamal? We can't forget about Kamal. He's a true gem.
He is this aspiring DJ talking about spiritual warfare through audio. He's like the embodiment of early 2000s internet weirdness.
Uh-huh, totally. But beneath all the humor, there's something kind of endearing about him, This genuine desire to share his music, to be part of the scene.
I totally agree. And it makes you realize, even with all the drama and debates, at its core, NYC 604 was about people trying to find their place, trying to connect with each other through a shared passion.
For sure. And sometimes that passion manifested in unexpected ways, like Kamal's quest to unleash his unique brand of sonic spirituality upon the world.
Well, I, for one, would love to hear that set, even if it's just to experience a bit of that early 2000s internet strangeness.
Uh-huh, me too. But unfortunately, these archives don't tell us if Kamal ever got his big DJing break.
Oh, another mystery left unsolved. I guess that's part of the charm of these deep dives. The unanswered questions keep lingering.
They do. And it encourages us to use our imagination to fill in the gaps, to imagine what the NYC trance scene might have become.
Which kind of brings us to a bigger question. What can we even learn from this glimpse into NYC 604? What still resonates today, beyond just the specifics of this 1 month in 2002?
That's a great way to put it, because while the technology has changed, the music might have evolved, the basic human elements of it all are timeless.
So true. And maybe that's the real value of these archives. They're like holding up a mirror to ourselves, to our own desires and anxieties about the communities we're part of today.
And they remind us that even those seemingly fleeting moments, those late-night online conversations, those passionate debates, they can become part of something bigger, something worth revisiting and thinking about years later.
That's a great way to put it. But before we get too philosophical, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up about Jason Sanachin that really stood out to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm all ears. He's definitely a fascinating figure, even if his opinions could be a bit extreme sometimes.
It's not even just his strong opinions, but his writing style. It's so distinct.
Oh, totally. He had this way with words, these almost poetic turns of phrase, even when he was ranting about something like glow sticks.
Yes. Like, I found this quote where he's talking about the essence of trance music, and he says, it's about reaching a higher state of consciousness, about transcending the mundane through sound and rhythm.
Wow, yeah, classic Jason. He might have been a bit rigid in his worldview, but you can't deny his passion, his ability to put into words what the music meant to him.
Makes you wonder, was he like a writer outside of these emails? Did he have any other creative outlets?
That's a question for another deep dive, maybe. But it does point to something important, right? Even within these very niche online communities, you find these hidden talents, these unexpected bursts of creativity.
And it reminds you that behind every username, every online persona, there's a whole person with their own story, their own aspirations.
Absolutely. And while these archives might be focused on the specific NYC trance scene, they're also, in a way, a testament to that human need for connection, for expression, for finding your people, even if it's online and fueled by, like, pulsating beats.
That's a great way to put it. Well, I feel like we've only scratched the surface of what these emails have to offer.
Oh, totally. We could spend hours dissecting Jason's pronouncements, analyzing every little detail of the whole raver versus trancer debate.
And we can't forget about Kamal, still waiting in the wings with his spiritual warfare audio.
Haha, that's right. But for now, I think it's time to step back from the little details and consider the bigger picture.
Right, like the so what of it all. What can our listeners really take away from this deep dive into a seemingly niche corner of internet history?
That's where we'll pick things up next time, actually, because believe it or not, there are some surprisingly relevant insights we can pull from these 20-year-old emails.
Ooh, another cliffhanger. Our listeners are going to have to wait to hear the grand finale.
They won't be disappointed, I promise. There's still a lot to unpack, and some of it might even resonate with their own experiences in online communities today.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into those NYC604 email list archives.
Hmm.
We've seen this whole scene grapple with, everything from that crazy heated shelter to like the deep philosophical meaning of glow sticks, haha. But honestly, what stood out most to me is how these emails from like 20 years ago still feel so relevant today.
Yeah, I totally agree. The technology might be different now, obviously, but the human element of it all is like timeless. That desire to belong somewhere, the anxiety about keeping a scene pure, even just the way online discussions can get, well, heated.
Yeah.
It's all still happening today.
And speaking of heated discussions, we can't finish this deep dive without revisiting our friend Jason Sanachin, that outspoken guardian of trance authenticity. I'm curious, looking back at the whole month of September 2002, did his perspective on the whole ravers versus trancers thing change at all?
It's interesting. He definitely doubled down on some of his views, especially when it came to those synthetic Sadhu's parties. He saw them as a symbol of everything wrong with the scene, too commercial, too focused on the spectacle instead of the actual substance.
Which again taps into that anxiety about the underground losing its way, becoming too mainstream.
Exactly. And you can see how that fear resonated with others, even those who might not have agreed with everything Jason said.
It's like that constant tension between wanting the scene to grow and thrive, but also wanting to protect what makes it unique, keep it special.
Yeah, and that tension is something that basically every subculture has to deal with at some point.
Oh, for sure. You see it in music, fashion, even in online communities today. But what I find so fascinating about Jason is that, even in the middle of his rants, you find these moments of real insight, almost like poetry.
Oh, absolutely. He could be a little rough around the edges, but you can't deny his passion for the music and his ability to really express what made it so special for him.
Totally. Like when he talks about trance music being like sonic meditation, or how certain tracks create a vortex of energy that pulls you in and transports you to another dimension.
Haha. Yeah, it's like he's almost channeling the music through his words, trying to get people who don't get it to understand the experience.
And that brings us back to the power of language, right?
Yeah.
Even in these random casual emails.
For sure. These emails weren't meant to be literary masterpieces or anything, but there are these little gems in there, these flashes of individual expression that really make the whole scene come to life.
And it makes you wonder, what other hidden talents were lurking in NYC604? Did anyone else become a writer, a poet, a philosopher, all inspired by these late-night, trance-fueled discussions?
That's a great question. I mean, who knows? Maybe there's a whole generation of artists and thinkers out there who were shaped by those early online communities.
I love that idea. It
Right.
speaks to the impact subcultures can have,
Yeah.
how they can plant these seeds that end up blossoming in ways you'd never expect.
It's true. And it reminds us that these scenes are about so much more than just the music itself. It's about the people, the connections, the experiences we share together that all shape who we become.
I like that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of NYC604, September 2002, what are some key takeaways you'd want our listeners to think about?
Well, I think it's really interesting to see how, even before social media as we know it today, online communities were already so important in shaping subcultures. They gave people a space to share information, debate ideas, and just create that sense of belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also worth pointing out how these communities were dealing with things that are still totally relevant today. That push and pull between the underground and the mainstream, the desire to stay authentic, how music can connect us and even transform us. Those themes go way beyond just this one specific NYC trance scene.
For sure. And for any of our listeners out there who are part of a subculture today, whether it's music, art, whatever, I think these emails offer a good reminder. Cherish those connections, those passionate discussions, those moments you share with your people, because you're all creating something bigger than you might realize.
Really well said. And who knows? Maybe someday your online conversations will be a time capsule for future generations to explore. So, on that note, I think it's time to bring our deep dive to a close. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought. What are the subcultures that have shaped your life? And how are you contributing to their evolution? We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to reach out to the show and share your stories. Until then, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep the music alive.